The woman gripped her phone tightly as she spoke firmly to the authorities. "I'm telling you, there's a black child causing trouble on my land." Soon, the flashing lights lit up the peaceful street, and the wail of sirens cut through the quiet of the afternoon. In the center of it all stood Ethan Carter, a 12-year-old boy, standing next to a patrol car. His face was pale, his hands shaking. Around him, a small crowd had gathered, murmuring among themselves. This is how it all began. Ethan, a bright, well-mannered child who had recently moved into the neighborhood with his mother, loved basketball. You could often find him outside, practicing his dribbling and shooting. That's exactly what he had been doing when everything changed. The ball had bounced out of his driveway, rolling across the street. Ethan followed it, laughing, as it came to a stop in a neighbor's yard. It wasn't a big deal, or at least, that's what he thought. He walked to the edge of the yard and called out, "Excuse me, my ball is over here." But no one answered. Ethan hesitated, not wanting to stir up any trouble. He glanced around, making sure no one was watching. When no one came out, he stepped into the yard to retrieve his ball. What Ethan didn't know was that someone was watching. Karen Thompson stood at her window, her eyes fixed on him. To her, it wasn't just a boy getting his ball back, it was something more. Karen frowned, her mind swirling with assumptions. Who is this child? She thought. Why is he on my land? Without taking the time to find out, she grabbed her phone and dialed, "Hello. Police. There's a black child causing trouble on my property," she said, her voice clear and sharp. "He looks suspicious. Can you send someone right away?" By the time Ethan grabbed his ball and began walking back, he heard something that made him stop in his tracks. The loud sirens grew near. Ethan turned. He saw the patrol car approaching. 2 officers stepped out. Their faces were serious. For a moment, Ethan did not understand. Why had they come? The officers walked toward him. Their voices were calm, yet strong. "What brings you here, boy?" one of them asked. Ethan gripped his basketball tighter, his fingers curling around it. I came for my ball," he whispered. His voice was soft. It rolled into her yard. Before he could speak more, the woman stepped out of her home. She pointed toward Ethan, her voice sharp, rising above the calm of the officers. "That's him," she cried. "He's been sneaking around here all day. I don't care what he says. That boy doesn't belong here." The officers exchanged looks. Their faces remained unreadable. One of them turned to Ethan. "Boy, is it true?" he asked, his tone steady. "Were you trespassing?" Ethan's eyes fell to the ground. The ball in his hands felt heavier than before. His voice was so quiet it barely reached the ears of those who stood watching. "I wasn't trespassing," Ethan said, his words soft as the wind. "I was just getting my ball." The woman's arms folded tightly, her voice bitter. "Sure," she sneered. "That's what they always say. It starts with a ball, and before you know it, they're looking for a house to rob." The weight of her words pressed down on Ethan like a storm cloud. His eyes darted around, meeting the watchful gazes of the officers, the silent neighbors peering from windows, standing in their doorways. "Why didn't you stay in your own yard?" the officer asked. His voice still steady. Ethan blinked, his heart racing. He didn't understand the question, but he could feel the weight of everyone's eyes upon him, waiting for him to say the wrong thing. The woman stood with her arms crossed, her face full of pride, her voice sharp as a thorn. "I told you," she said to the officers. "I knew he was up to something, but Ethan wasn't up to anything. He was just a boy, standing in the wrong place at the wrong time, with nothing but his ball." Ethan had been enjoying a simple game of basketball when everything suddenly changed. The officer, uncertain of what to do, was under pressure from Karen's insistence to make a decision. He told Ethan that he would need to come with him for questioning. Ethan didn't resist or argue, but his voice wavered as he asked for one thing. "Can I call my mother?" What Karen didn't know, and what the officer didn't realize, was that Ethan's mother was no ordinary parent. She was Governor Lisa Carter, the most powerful person in the land. The phone rang in the governor's office. When she answered, Ethan's shaking voice filled the air. He told her everything he needed to say, and in an instant, she knew everything she needed to do. Without hesitation, she made one call, then another. Within minutes, a convoy of powerful vehicles sped toward the neighborhood. The sirens wailed, first one, then two, then a whole fleet of black SUVs thundered down the road. Their lights flashing, engines growling. Karen stood still in her yard, a furrow of confusion on her face. She couldn't understand what was happening. Why so many vehicles? Who were they for? As the convoy rolled to a stop, the door of one of the SUVs opened. Out stepped Governor Lisa Carter. Calm and commanding. She didn't rush. She didn't hesitate. Her presence alone made it clear she was someone important. Everyone knew who she was. Karen's face twisted in shock. She had thought she was dealing with a simple case of trespassing. How could she have known the boy she accused was the son of the state's most powerful figure? Lisa Carter's eyes scanned the crowd, moving from the officers to the neighbors, to Karen, and finally landing on Ethan. She studied him quietly. For a moment, her face was unreadable. Then, she spoke, her voice calm but carrying an edge that cut through the air, sharp like a stone blade. "What is happening here?" she asked. The officers hesitated. One cleared his throat, looking at Karen, eyes unsure. "Governor Carter," he said, his voice respectful but uneasy. "We were called for a report of suspicious activity. This young man was seen on private land." Lisa raised one eyebrow, her attention now fully on Karen. "You made this report?" she asked. Karen, still struggling to find her balance, nodded quickly. "Yes," she said, her voice softer now. "I saw him in my yard. I didn't know who he was, or what he was doing. So, I called for help. I thought it was the right thing to do." The air hung still as Lisa didn't respond right away. Letting the silence speak, her gaze remained steady, never leaving Karen, before she turned back to the officers. "This is Ethan Carter, my son," she said. "And what proof do you have to say he was doing anything wrong?" The officers exchanged uneasy glances. Uncomfortable, they struggled for words. Lisa's gaze softened for just a moment as she looked at Ethan, offering him a small nod. Then she turned back to Karen, her voice calm, but with a quiet authority. "So," she said slowly, "a 12-year-old boy retrieves a ball, and your first thought is to call for help?" Karen tightened her hands into fists, her breath coming faster. "I didn't know who he was," she said, her voice rising defensively. "He could have been anyone. And kids like him, they don't just wander into others' yards without a reason." Lisa's expression didn't change, but her voice dropped lower, her words now carrying weight, sharp as a storm. "Kids like him?" she repeated, her voice quiet but firm. "What exactly does that mean?" The silence that followed thickened. The neighbors looked at each other, uncomfortable, the meaning of Lisa's words settling into the air. Karen's earlier certainty faltered. Lisa stepped forward, her presence unwavering, and her voice calm, yet commanding. "Let me be very clear," she began. "You called the law on a child. You accused him without evidence. And now, here you are, trying to defend it with assumptions that reveal more about you than they do about him. You should be held accountable." The people around them were quiet, taken aback by the force of her words. The truth of the moment began to settle in, like a heavy stone sinking into the earth. Press the mark of honor if you believe justice should not be determined by the color of one's skin. She said. Addressing the crowd, Lisa turned to the lawkeepers. I want this situation resolved, she stated firmly, her voice steady, and I want it done in the right way. My child deserves more than this. The officers nodded, their sense of duty returning with a renewed professionalism. Karen, feeling the weight of shame settle over her, responded softly, I am sorry, Governor Carter. Lisa turned back to face both Karen and the officers. Her voice deliberate, like the steady rhythm of a drumbeat. This isn't just about my son, she said. This is about every child who has been made to feel they do not belong. About every parent who wonders whether their child will come home safely. The crowd, gathered around them, stood in silence. For some, it was a moment of deep reflection, a mirror held up to their own biases. For others, it was a stark reminder of the work still to be done. Then, the governor spoke to the people, not as a politician, but as a mother, as someone who felt the weight of their shared humanity. She spoke of fear, of prejudice, and the need to see one another as people first, beyond race or identity. Her words were simple, yet they carried the power of the land. We all have a responsibility, she said, to ourselves, to our neighbors, to the children who will inherit this world. Let us make it one where they feel safe, one where they feel valued. Lisa turned to Karen one final time. Her voice remained calm, yet her words held the strength of a promise. Think carefully before you make assumptions like this again, she said, because next time, there may not be a second chance. Time would not end here. Karen's face fell, her earlier bravado completely gone. And for Lisa, she knew this was not the end. No, it was only the beginning to change the mindset, the community, and to ensure no other child would ever have to endure what Ethan had just experienced. But the impact, it was undeniable. Karen Thompson, once so confident in her place among the people, now found herself more and more isolated. The shame of what she had done lingered with her, felt in every interaction, in every glance from those around her. But Lisa, strong and wise, reached out to the local community association. She proposed a series of gatherings, workshops, and discussions about bias, inclusion, trust, and accountability, a way to heal the wounds, to understand one another better, to stand together. Ethan, too, found a way to channel his experience. With his mother by his side, guiding him with love, he spoke before his school's gathering. I didn't understand why someone would think I was bad just because of the way I look, he said, his voice strong, yet filled with a quiet strength. But now I know, we have to stand against that. We must be better. What had started as a single incident, a basketball rolling into the wrong yard, had become a turning point, a moment of reckoning for the entire community. Karen Thompson learned a painful lesson, a lesson about the weight of one's actions. The kind of lesson that stays with a person long after the light fades, long after the whispers quiet down. And Lisa Carter, she never stopped fighting. She fought as a leader, as a mother, as a neighbor, and as a voice for the ones too often unheard. Because, in the end, this was never just about one boy, one woman, or one neighborhood. No, this was a story about the power of truth, the courage to confront the assumptions we carry within us, and the hope that, together, we can build a world where everyone truly belongs.